Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time center of pestilence, and welcome back to the Dr. Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss magic, mysticism, religion, the occult, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the divine masculine. In a video about 2 videos ago, I talked about the divine feminine. And I feel like this discussion would be incomplete if I do not touch on the divine masculine. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about masculine archetypes, what the divine masculine is, what it means metaphysically, if masculinity is bad, the virtues of masculinity, and finally, how to connect to the divine masculine. So let's break into it. So first of all, I kind of want to get this out of the way because I know people have strong feelings about it, so may as well lead with that, you know? This video will come out right at the end of Mercury retrograde, so that means it's probably a good time for a bit of a spicy take, and that would be, is masculinity toxic? Because a lot of people, when you mention the divine masculine, they kind of get a little uncomfortable. Mostly because there have been many times when people have used masculinity in a damaging way, or masculinity has presented in a way that certainly was toxic. But not all masculinity is bad. Masculinity can be a beautiful thing, and it has an important role to play metaphysically. As well, I find when people enter the occult, especially if they go a more pagan perspective, since the Abrahamic religions are so masculine heavy, though of course there are aspects of the divine feminine in those faiths, not trying to discount that, but many people feel like the Abrahamic faiths lack femininity. So they go really hard in the other direction, which in turn just creates the same mistake. And many people who do feel more called to the divine masculine over the feminine feel a bit unbalanced. And personally, I believe that both the masculine and the feminine need to be recognized and worked with to fully achieve balance. Because as we know, the divine feminine and the divine masculine are 2 pillars on the tree of life. And there is a 3rd pillar. The feminine pillar is that of severity, of form. And the masculine pillar is that of mercy and force. And how that works in a relationship is that things emanate down from the divine, from the Godhead, and then through the spheres and into our material reality. And to create that, the divine masculine essentially is force, it's expansion, it's growth. And then the feminine constricts and gives it form. If there was endless of something, an endless supply, but it was never given boundaries or limits, it would simply be unperfected. It would be imbalanced. And then when these come together, they produce the pillar of equilibrium, of androgyny, of the child. And that is the perfected form. And actually the material plane, which is the sphere of Malkut, is in the center pillar, meaning that we are made of both the masculine and the feminine. And to only acknowledge one side of that equation is simply unbalanced. And so I think that if you are someone who does feel uncomfortable around masculinity, that's something that you need to unpack. Maybe even seek out a therapist or help with that. Because the masculine, once you really discover how it can be such a beautiful thing, it no longer is a dirty word. It's no longer scary. It's something that can be embraced and understood as a virtue. It just takes understanding what it even is. In many cultures and in many paradigms, there's the idea of the masculine and the feminine consort. In Wicca, this is portrayed as the horned god and the triple goddess, and together they create the pairing. They represent the 2 polarities, and in ritual they are symbolized as coming together as the athame being the divine masculine and the chalice being the divine feminine, and a common symbolic trope is them being brought together, combining the 2 to create a result, to create a manifestation. As well in Thelema, the idea of polarity is a very central thing. In many Thelemic rituals, you have a priest and a priestess working together. So the masculine and the feminine coming together is a beautiful and powerful thing. And as well, since we are in Malkut, there is both masculine and feminine within us. So even if you are a very feminine woman like myself, I think of myself as very traditionally feminine, I still connect with the divine masculine, and I still find value in working with masculine archetypes and deities. As well, masculinity presents in many forms. A very popular way to describe the sort of ways that masculinity manifests through this concept of the king, the magician, the warrior, and the lover. And this was popularized by Robert Moore, a Jungian analyst. He even made a personality test for this. And he sort of argued that these are the 4 main ways that masculinity manifests itself through religion, through archetypes, and through psychology, and through people. So basically, the first one is the king, the valorous leader, that very idea of the regal man, the one who is commanding, who can lead, who can pull people in a good direction. And that king archetype can be expressed positively and negatively. It can be expressed as someone who is able to provide, to protect, to give guidance, or as someone who's a ruthless leader who is actually harming the people he claims to serve. And so in that sense, even these archetypes and these ways that things manifest, they can be good or bad, meaning that masculinity in and of itself is not a bad thing. In mythology, we see many kings. We see Zeus, which Zeus is a very complex mythologic figure. At times, he is both the negative and the positive manifestation of this trope. As well, another popular archetype is the magician. The magician is, of course, my favorite of the masculine archetypes as an occultist. I'm very partial to this one, but the magician is that very creative figure, the one who can bring ideas, bring new perspectives, pull things in, and create and connect to these very esoteric things. And that you see magicians through lore and history, through mythology, through folklore, through religion, that have been amazing people, even through history. Like you see John Dee, who was able to discover a whole system of magic and commune directly with God, but you also see ideas like Faust, who was willing to do all sorts of crazy things for power, even if it ended up hurting him. And so even that masculine urge to pursue power can be a beautiful thing by understanding the power of the gods and being able to share that with many magicians after you, or as something a lot more sinister, where it's you seeking wealth, but at what cost? The next would be the lover. The lover is the form of the divine masculine that is able to begin a courtship, who approaches those around him, who spreads love and joy and fatherhood throughout the world. And that is an archetype that people tend to associate with the feminine. When you look at who love goddesses are, I even default, I said love goddesses, not love gods. They're almost all feminine. But this idea of being a lover is actually a central part of masculinity, because to go through the world and to find the consort, it is important to understand love, to understand romance, and connect to those things. Men who are masculine, or women who connect to the divine masculine, as women can absolutely connect to the divine masculine, they sometimes may be like stuck in this pigeonhole of what masculinity looks like and forget that masculinity manifests itself in a plethora of ways. Even on the tree of life, how I mentioned earlier, if you go down the pillar of mercy, each of these spheres have different values. They look different. And as well, each of the spheres of the tree of life have corresponding entities, corresponding angels. You can go really far with it. People sometimes act like the Kabbalah is like kind of the filing cabinet of the universe. That was an idea really pushed by Thelemite writer Friedrich Kahn. So even within that, there's so many different ways that it appears. And then of course, when you get into archetypes, it gets even more complex. So even masculine energy can be many things. And then of course, there's the very classic masculine archetype of the warrior, the strong one, the one who's willing to fight, to embrace fire, as fire is a masculine element, to spread intensity, passion, and strength, and be that very classic hero that you see throughout Western mythology and Western storytelling. That is as well part of the divine masculine and is a powerful archetype. And that's one in particular I've seen a lot of women sort of connecting with, right? They connect to their inner huntress, their inner warrior, their inner sort of Amazonian woman. So the masculine is not locked to one gender, and it's not locked to this idea of like lifting weights. It is connected to virtues. And I wanted to go through a few of some of the masculine virtues. That would be strength, that would be power, that would be discipline, that would be the ability to rule, to protect, to provide, to be able to be cunning and clever. Those are also masculine traits. And there are actually a few more masculine archetypes that I wanted to discuss, though they are not in those classical 4 archetypes that were popularized by modern Jungian writers, and that would be the trickster. So in mythology, a lot of people's like favorite gods are the trickster gods, especially people who are really into the Norse stuff. A lot of people are kind of into Loki. And that trickster spirit, that cunningness, that sort of insidious cleverness, that is a masculine archetype. As well, there is the wild man. The man, this is very similar to the wild woman archetype that I discussed. The man who's in the wilderness, who's no longer constrained by the restrictions of society and sort of forges his own path in this free-spirited way. That is another masculine archetype. So now let's discuss how to connect to the divine masculine for anyone who has been interested in, okay, cool, I get what it is. I get that it's the force of the universe. It's the generative, creative principle, and it manifests in these various archetypes, though of course there are more than I could touch on because I try not to make my YouTube videos too long. But how do I actually connect with it? And Of course, the strategies in my previous video do hold up. You can do very similar things, but there are some that I find work a little bit better with divine masculine figures. The first thing I want to talk about is devotional acts. So when we talk about like offerings or sacrifice or giving something to spirits, we tend to focus really heavily on physical things, like giving, say, an offering of a glass of wine or giving a recipe that you made and putting a bit on your altar after you've eaten your meal. But there are other ways to connect and give offerings, and some of them can be even a little bit more potent. Since a lot of these masculine themes are around things like strength, you could absolutely, and this is kind of feeding into that very sort of, pigeonhole-y version of masculinity, but it is still a legitimate form of masculinity, would be maybe start like a workout practice and devote it to a specific god. Maybe devote it to Mars, the very masculine archetype of war and strength. So making like, say, a martial practice of a devotional act that you do regularly, that is absolutely a way to connect and to devote yourself to that energy and to get closer to it. As well, you can, of course, work with masculine gods directly. There are many, many masculine gods in mythology that across culture. I'm sure in your personal religious paradigm, there is some masculine god that you can work with, but some classics are anything solar. So the solar principle, which is the sun, for those who don't know, solar equals sun. I think you know solar is equals sun. I don't know why I felt the need to explain that, but the sun is a very classically masculine archetype and represents a lot of what masculinity represents. In astrology, the sun is the ego, the identity. It is it's connected to creativity, it's connected to strength, to that sort of king role. And in many cultures, the sun god is a god and the moon is a goddess. Though sometimes this pairing is flipped up. Like in Wicca, you see the god, the male consort, as a like Pan-like horned god, which represents that very taboo wild man masculinity. The horned god is really interesting in Wicca in particular because the horned god is this very feral Pan Serranios-like figure, which that is also a masculine archetype, the taboo, the transgressor. If you want to get really left-hand pathy about it, I'll go there. The idea of like the devil in the way that it appears in European folklore, because the way that Lucifer and the devil is described in the Bible and the folkloric devil are kind of different. Like this idea of this horned transgressive figure out in the middle of the woods is a very later idea. In a lot of ideas around sabbatic witchcraft and traditional witchcraft, there's this idea that the women who want to be witches will approach the horned figure, the man in black, the devil, and then connect with him to get their powers. And that is a masculine figure. So even things like that is yet another form, that very dark and transgressive thing. So in Wicca, you see that paired with, the triple goddess. Though, of course, the horned god is not the devil. I'm not trying to imply that. The horned god represents nature and ferality, but the horned god does kind of parallel some ideas about the devil. Not saying that they're the same, just saying that in traditional witchcraft, you see the devil in kind of a similar way, but in Wicca, you see the horned god. Horned god, devil, not the same. That's not what I'm trying to say. But this idea of like the horned male figure, that's a very common idea. So the idea of a consort is very common. If you're a practitioner, a lot of people like to work with both a god and a goddess, especially in neo-paganism. With people who have a kind of a Wicca-y influence, they will work with a male god and a female goddess to balance themselves out. Because as I said earlier, there's masculinity and femininity in all of us. So a really kind of logical way to do this, and I personally kind of agree with this idea, is to work with something that's contrary to your nature. As well, like when you're picking what spirits to work with, because a lot of people just say work with spirits. They don't really say like, what type of spirit should you as an individual actually work with? So I always recommend working with spirits that are either completely opposite of your nature so that you can balance yourself out, or spirits that align with your nature or are connected to some epithet that impacts your life. Like say you're an artist, maybe you want to work with Apollo because he's connected to creativity. So stuff like that makes sense. Or you could go the complete other direction. Like if you're a very meek person, work with something like Mars to teach you those lessons of strength and force, which another point here, even if you're someone who sort of lacks masculinity, working with the divine masculine can help you even more. Because if you're a very traditionally masculine person, you're like that kind of burly man vibe, working with the divine masculine is great because it accentuates what's already in you. But if you're the complete opposite, you can actually learn almost sometimes even more than the other side. Because by seeing the other side of the mysteries, and learning those things and teaching yourself those traits can really benefit your life in a lot of ways. Of course, you can also connect to archetypes and kind of try to embody the archetypes. If you're someone who's less of a polytheist and you're more into like Jungian psychology and the kind of psychological paradigm stuff, archetypes are a great way to do this, because a lot of these masculine archetypes parallel culture to culture. You see various similar manifestations of masculinity in many places. The warrior, king, lover, magician trope is probably some of the most common. There's a reason why modern Jungian psychologists like it so much, because it is such a common list of things that are there. So those are sort of my methods on how to connect to the divine masculine. This video is a little shorter just because I covered a lot of similar ground in my divine feminine video that came before this. But sort of the thing that I want people to take away from this is that masculinity, strength, valor, bravery, those are good things. Masculinity is not bad, and you don't need to go full Christian to connect to the divine masculine. You don't need to devote yourself to a single masculine god or spend 10 hours in the workout room lifting weights to be masculine. Masculinity manifests itself in many forms, and I think every single person can find a manifestation, an archetype of masculinity that they can relate to, connect to, and discover their inner wisdom from. There's a lot that can be learned from masculinity, and in a lot of ways working with the divine masculine is very helpful, simply due to the fact that it is the force, the generative, the growth, the expansion. And in our lives, we need expansion, because if you work entirely with feminine, you're going to be working with constrictive form energy all the time, and it's going to generally make you unbalanced. I think in general, balance is one of the most key concepts in occultism. I really like this one expression by Crowley. I'm going to quote it wrong because I'm on my feed. I don't have it right in front of me. Basically, he said, the balancing of the two opposites on anything, by smashing them together, you will find the answer, the solution, the true insight. And I think that's very true with masculinity and femininity. By taking these two poles and bringing them together and seeing how they combine, that is where illusions are destroyed. And that is where balance is had. Because the ultimate principle is to combine the masculine and the feminine into the androgyny, into the masculine, into the magical child, and bring that forth into the world. So the idea of bringing these two together are so important. And so no matter who you are, you can work with the masculine, and I find that you can learn a lot from the masculine, even if you think that it's not necessarily for you. Working with gods and working with goddesses, or male spirits or female spirits, whatever it is that you like to work with, can teach you so many lessons. So I wish you luck on your journey. So if you want to support me, you can find me on many platforms. I'm on Instagram, TikTok. I'm obviously here on YouTube. You're watching me on YouTube. I'm on Twitter, Telegram. I'm pretty much everywhere. I also have a Patreon. That's where you can support me. You get extra videos every month, ritual guides, early access. I give all my videos about a week early. And if you're at high tier, you can poke my brain and have conversations with me and get your questions answered. As well, I host the podcast MAGNOLIAS and Magick. That's pretty much everywhere podcasts can be found. So tune into that if you want to hear more of me. I give commentary in that rather than like educational stuff, though it has moved in a more educational direction recently. So I hope that that all sort of benefits you. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you want, and if you're subscribed for 93 days, you'll meet your holy guardian angel, and you'll never have to hear me say the word masculine again. All right, bye.